Hello everyone, in today's tutorial I'll be going over how I made this marshmallow transformation and how I use some sub-level attributes to drive shading and switching between materials. We'll go through the modeling of the marshmallows, the transition, attribute creation, and a walkthrough of the flame and chocolate. I'll highlight some information in the LOPNET and demonstrate how easy it is to transition between materials in Houdini. So we're going to start off by making our marshmallow, and we're going to do that using VDBs. Once we've created the marshmallow, then we're going to do a sort of transition between the low resolution marshmallow to the high resolution marshmallow, or basically how the marshmallow would look like if it was being burnt with the flames. And then we're going to cache that out and use that marshmallow change or transition as our collision for flip fluids, and also use it to drive our flames as well. So to create the marshmallow, let's drop off a geometry node, and in it we're going to put a tube. We can leave the radius of the tube like this, but we're just going to do end caps. And I want to change the height because the marshmallow is usually a bit stocky, so say like 1.45. And I want to increase my rows, so we have something like that. Next, I want to group the edges, so make a group node. And for this, I want to select edges and just name it $OS, and I want the group to be called edge. I'll just select with the base group, I want this edge and this edge. And next, I will make a transform node. And I want it to work on the edge. I just want to scale it down by 0.8, scale it down by 0.8 as well. So it gives us this sort of look. And then I'll make a poly bevel as well. And the poly bevel is also to work on the edges. There, so we have something like that. Decreases the sharpness of the edges. And now I'll do a subdivide. Increase that quite a bit, so we have something like that. And then from here, I will add a mounting node. And I'll explain the reason for this mounting node in a bit. Since we are going to create most of the noise with VDB, why do we need a mounting node? I'll just decrease this amplitude a bit, and I think that's about it for this. Yep. And the reason why I'm creating this mounting node is I want some parts of this marshmallow to be noisier than the rest, and I want to drive that by a group, and that group is going to be based on the normal. So I need the marshmallow geometry to be slightly deformed so I can use that to drive the group. So I'm going to create a group node here, and I'll call this group node bias. And for this bias, I want to select keep by normals. And I want to decrease the spread angle using the Y. So I want to decrease that spread angle to like 89, thereabouts. So some parts of this marshmallow are going to be heavily based on noise, and some other parts are going to be less noisy than the others, and that's going to be based on this group that we've created. So next we'll just make that into an attribute. Just do something very simple, and I want to work on the bias. I will say f for float at bias is equal to 1, and now I have that bias attribute only on those parts of the geometry. Then I want to blur that a bit just so it doesn't create stepping. And I want to blur the attribute bias. Increase that slightly. So if we look at it here, you can see the difference the attribute blur makes. All right. And I think we are ready to move to VDB from polygons. So let's make VDB from polygons. And here I want to decrease my voxel size a lot. And I want to change this to a density VDB. I'm going to switch this because if we don't switch this when we're creating the noise, then we might see more of the inside showing, or it might begin to have holes. So we want to reduce that. I want to click fill interior as well for that. Now we have an extra attribute now which we've created, which is the attribute bias, and I want to take that into our volume VOP. So I just need to add the attribute here. The attribute is point bias, and I'm going to name it as bias. So I'll be able to reference this attribute in the volume VOP doing a bind import. So the next thing to do would be to create the volume VOP. And for this volume VOP, I just want to make the base of the marshmallow. So marshmallows aren't completely smooth. They have a little bit of noise, and this is even before they've been baked or they've been roasted. So I just want to add some noise to this in the first place. Okay, so the noise for the normal part of the marshmallow is going to be pretty easy. All I want to do is to add a turbulent noise. And I want to put the P into that P. And before I take it to the output, I want to do an add node here. So it will add the position and it will add the density from this initial VDB with this one. And that will give us this. So this is pretty extreme and not what I want. So in order to fix that, let's just change some of the settings. I'll leave the frequency. For the amplitude, I'm going to reduce that by a bit and take it into minus because I want it to bulge outward and not go back in. So I'll chain that there, and I can increase my roughness to something like here so you can see it's having some effect. And I can change the turbulence as well so it's a bit more grainy looking. And so this looks pretty good for the body of the marshmallow. Bear in mind we're still going to do a VDB smooth, so it's not going to look exactly as rough as this. So let's come back out and let's add a VDB smooth. So that's how it looks like. Let's reduce the iterations. I don't want it to be too smooth. So we have this and this. And let's create the volume VOP for our main noise, which is the roasted noise. Okay, go back to this. And for this noise, we're going to do something slightly different, which is to combine two different noises and also to use our point bias. So let's start off with the initial low noise, and I kind of need this one. That's this noise because I want it to match. So let's put that turbulent noise there, and let's create another noise, which is going to be our high noise. So this is low frequency noise, and this is high frequency noise. Okay, so for the high frequency noise, I want to, first of all, increase my frequency. Before we do that, perhaps we should add it so we can see the result. So let's drop an add node here. And then we can see what we're working on. Okay, so for the high frequency noise, what I want to do is to increase the frequency, first of all. Okay, that's a bit slow. Just change that to 6, 6, and 6. Okay, and the next thing I want to do, so that's way noisier than the other one. So the next thing I want to do is maybe change the amplitude. So that'll give me that, which is very noisy. Okay, and maybe we reduce the roughness a bit. Right, okay, so that looks more like, it looks a bit weird, but let's keep up with it. And now I want to mix these two noises first. So let's do a mix. And put this into the add. Okay, so of its own accord, it's going to decide what areas should be low frequency and what areas should be high frequency. So this isn't the important part yet. Okay, so let us bring in another type of noise, which we'll just leave it as high 2. Yep. And for this one, I'm going to plug it straight into the add, just so I can see what I'm working on. And for this noise, I want to drive that frequency a lot higher, but I also, of course, need to reduce my amplitude and change the roughness to something like 396, and let's increase this by a lot. I don't want it to be perfectly distributed. I want it to stretch a bit, which is why I'm doing 50, 10, 10. All right, so this is what we have. Okay, looks good. And now I want to mix these two noises. Let's put this one first. Let's put this mix second. And then let's bring in our bias with a bind. Everything's a bit slow today. Okay, so we bring our attribute in with the bind and plug that into the bias. Okay, and this is what will then go into my add. Okay, so we have a varied distribution here. We're seeing like up to 3 different noise types just across the marshmallow. So that's what I want. And when we bring it back out, that's what we have. Compare it to this. So it looks like the marshmallow has gone through something. And we want to add a VDB reshape node. Shape SDF. And I want to dilate, but not by too much. This is just to correct any holes that might exist in the geometry. And then let's do a VDB smooth, I think, or not completely necessary. And this is what we have. So how are we going to transition between this and this? Very simple. We just need to make a volume velocity that's going to drive the change between the two. So let's make a box. And for this box, not too much to do, maybe change the size of it. I want it to be where it just kind of covers the marshmallow. And then I want to change it to VDB from polygons. I'm going to remove it and make a density. Yep. And next I want to create a volume velocity node. Okay, in a volume velocity node, let's just take a look at it. So for this place, I want to add some curl noise, right? And we can take the grain, which is going to change the swirls that we have, and maybe increase that till here. It's looking a bit different already. And let's add another volume velocity to go into the mask. Oh. All right. And for this one, I want to add curl noise again and increase the swirl size by a lot. Thereabouts. And also increase this again. Yep. Around there is good, and remove the time dependency from this one. So we plug that into the mask and just give it a bit of place. So that's how the noise is looking. And then we can adjust it with the volume adjust fog. And just enable post process minimum maximum, so it makes it more refined. And I think the next thing we need to do is to animate it so it goes from whatever direction you want it to go. So for here, we want to animate it, and what we will do is to set this to subtract and make a line. So this will tell us what direction we want the line to be. Let's change this to 0 centered, okay? And let's enable a remap, right? Okay, so let's just take this. Oh, no. Okay, so let's take that there, and the start position should be very little, sort of like there. And I want to remap this slightly. So, we should also enable post-process as well. Set the minimum maximum to 0 and 1. Okay. Okay, so let's reshape this ramp a bit. Let's select that one and change it to B-spline, and also this one to B-spline. And let's have something here and draw this one down around there. Okay, and now I want to change the position of the guide. So we can switch this around and switch this to go lower. So let's say minus 0.338, right? That looks fine. And just checking everything, see if I missed something. Okay, looks good. And let me just adjust this a bit. Yeah, so it's straight or straighter. And now let's add keyframes. And let's move to another keyframe. Let's say frame 48. And for this keyframe, I want to just animate only this. Oh, no. I want to animate this instead. So let's take it high. 0.5 looks fine. Okay, so if we look at it, it goes from bottom all the way to the top, and it's noisy. All right, so that's good. And this procedure or this method of doing the transition, I didn't create it. I just found it as well online, and I thought it was very useful for what I wanted to use it for. And it involves using a solver. Apparently this made it faster. I don't know why. And just let's plug everything in. So let's go into the solver. And in our solver, we have we're going to use the VDB Morph SDF. So VDB Morph SDF is something people use, but going into the solver is something another person suggested. And so we want to put our target VDB, which is our input 2, into the second one. And we want the alpha VDB mask to be input 3. And we just need to change this because it was working more towards the end of the timeline, which I don't want. I just changed this to 0.1, and I believe that was everything. So if we go out and we sort of play this, then over time the VDB will morph to the second one. So after a little flipbook, this is what we have. And I think that's developing nicely. All right. So this is a gigantic marshmallow. It's really big. Marshmallows aren't this big. So the next thing we want to do is to first of all convert that to a polygon and then resize it. Looks very detailed. Like that. Okay. And of course you can structure your noise however you want it. This is just based on the reference I saw and how I wanted it to look. And yeah. So the next important thing to do is to put a transform. No. Yeah. And I want to make it really little. If I'm going to do anything, I like to use the test geometry template body, and that will determine the size of things for me. So for this, I want to make it very little, even smaller. That's still pretty big, but I think it will work well for what we want. So the next thing is to repositioning. I just picked any position that I felt would work. and I rotated it slightly because I wanted it to be on an angle when I put the stick under it. So here, there we have that, and then we can just do a file cache. So I'll do the file cache and I'll be back. After doing 6 different variations, I went from this to this to this to this to this, and finally this is the noise that I found worked best for me. So that's what we have, and now it's time to do some attribute creation and make it as good as possible for render and also for some of the other things that we will need, for example the flip simulation and the smoke. I kept some of my older caches because I felt they would be useful for making collisions, but it's not necessary. So for the marshmallow, I am going to make a time shift node, and the reason is because I want to make an attribute thickness, which I'm going to use for shading. So for this, I just want to delete channels and end up with frame 41. When we have that, I want to measure the thickness. Oh, it's going to take a while. Okay, that took a bit longer than I thought. So let's take a look at the thickness here. That's how it looks like right now. And I just want to remap it a bit. So I'm working on thickness. If I compute the range, that's what I have. So let's remap this to like 0.2 and 1. Me somewhere around here is okay. And put this one back here. Let's change these to B-spline. Yeah, this is what I want. Yep. This is very little. 0.00. Let's put that 0.01. And let's put this as 0.1. Doesn't change it. Okay. Yeah, we can work with this. The important thing is for us to have those higher parts of the geometry a different color because they're going to be the burnt bits, and we want a nice transition between the burnt to the normal part so it looks correct. And that's basically everything that we want. And then we want to do an attribute blur. And we're not blurring the position. We want to blur the thickness by a bit, just by 2. And that's it. If we do it too much, then they're going to lose, the edges are going to lose too much definition. So let's just blur it a bit. And then we should transfer this thickness back to this. Oh, attribute transfer. I will show how I textured it at the end. And what we want is to transfer our thickness. Okay, and that's all we changed. So I know it's inaccurate at the beginning, but we're going to drive the switching between the normal geometry and the elevated geometry later. So the next thing to do would be to create the pyro source. And we can pick a good frame. Perhaps let's use the same frame, the 41, and let's make a pyro source. All right. So for this pyro source, let's do a surface scatter, not volume scatter. And let's change the particle separation to something really low. And that looks fine. So let us make a group node and let's select our starting point. So we create a group node, create a sphere, put the sphere into the group node. Let's take points, untick that, and let's click keep in bounding regions, bounding object. Yep. So let's look at the sphere. Sphere is pretty far away. So let's make this sphere a polygon and let's push it up slightly, like there. I like the way it is just right there, so maybe let's rotate it. Yeah, so it's better evenly spread. And we can move it down a bit. So that's going to be our starting point for the pyro source. And based on this, we're going to call this, let's just call it here start. And we put this into an attribute create. And in the attribute create, all we need to say is based on the group start, we want to add a new attribute, which is temperature. And we want to just set it to like 1000 or something. So everything here is going to be at 1000 for temperature. And we're going to put that into the pyro source spread. So this is pretty standard stuff. You can find many tutorials based on this. So let's just take a look at the temperature. No. Yep. And so for this one, let's put the start frame to 3, just so it doesn't start immediately. And I want the cooling rate to be much lower, but not that low. So if we look at it, it's going to grow pretty easily. And we can add some noise to that by affecting the diffusion rate noise. And we can change this to this periodic purling flow and do like a remap of the noise here. Just up, down, up, down, up, like that. Okay. So it's not like just going completely straight up. Makes it look a bit less boring. And then we want to do a switch between the two because we need it to exist on that initial frame. So let's just make another attribute wrangle. And for this one, we'll just say if at temperature is equal to 0. So here, there's nothing. And let's do a switch. 1 and 2. And so for this one, I want it to switch on frame 3. So frame 2, let's make a keyframe. Frame 3, let's switch it. So this is what we have. It's pretty fast. Yeah. Okay. All right. Next, let us transfer this temperature attribute to this one. So now this one is going to have both our thickness and our temperature. And this temperature is what we're going to use to drive the change between each marshmallow. So for this one, we want to send only temperature. And then if we're going to take that into Solaris, then we should probably remap that because it's incredibly crazy right now. So let's remap the attribute temperature. Let's look at the highest first of the temperature. Okay, so when I initially did it, I was getting some very high points. So they were maybe about like 774. And now I'm seeing 440 something, but that's okay. And basically I want to just remap it between 0 and 50. Just like that. And I'm not changing anything there, just remapping it, because when it was that large, it was a bit crazy. Yeah. So now we have that, and then it just sort of covers everything. Okay. Okay. So based on this temperature, we are going to make another attribute, which we're going to use to drive the switch between the marshmallows. So let's just add another attribute wrangle. And now what I want to say is if at temperature is greater than 0.1. I know you can write it in a simpler way, but I like writing it like this. F at switch is equal to 1. So let us look at the switch. That's how it looks like now. And I just want to blur it a bit because it's very blocky. So let us select switch. And I want to push that very high. Yeah. So this is what we're going to use to drive the shading of our marshmallows. So we can visualize this better with a color node if you just want to see how it is. But now what we have is something between 0 and 1 instead of 0 and 50. It was meant to be between 0 and 1 instead of 0 and 50. So let's put into our color node, and we want to select ramp from attribute, and the attribute is switch. So let's turn off that visualization just for now. So everything is 0 right now, and I just want it to ramp up. So as it ramps up, we can see it's changing, and that's what we have. All right, I don't need this just to see how it looks like. And then we can just put an out here, null, out marshmallow. Okay, so the marshmallow is done. Okay, so I'm just going to give a summary of the smoke and the flip fluid because they're not the main focus for this tutorial. The main focus is the transition and also some stuff in LOPNET. So for this, I took one of my older low-res simulations and I did a time shift on the first frame, and I made a pyro source. I did the start node and I added the temperature attribute. I did a pyro source spread, rasterize the attribute and put it into the pyro solver. Here there's nothing really different or new that I have done from any other tutorial that you might have seen, and I just cached it here. So that's how it looks like. There is a bit of banding, but I did a volume blur just to give me that nice effect. I did do something different, which was in the pyro solver to switch the fire color ramp. I saw this in one of the files on the content library. I think it was by Attila, where he was talking about smokeless flames. And so what he did was to switch this ramp, and that's what gives us this look here, where the intensity of the flame is not here, so you can still see what's going on here, and it's more at the edges or at the top. Okay, so I do want to point out something here, which is when I took my flame into LOPNET, I couldn't see it rendering. I assigned the material and I did everything I was supposed to do, but I couldn't see it. And I later found out that it was because of the presence of the density attribute. Because my flame doesn't have a density attribute, there's no flame that's there, then there's no need to have the density attribute, and that was somehow preventing it from rendering. So I've deleted the density attribute here, and I just have the important things, which is a temperature and flame fields there, and then I'm putting it into the null. I'll just also do a walkthrough of my chocolate. Like I mentioned, it's nothing different. I was trying to do some tracing here to give me a chocolate that looked kind of like that had kind of the Houdini logo, but eventually I just decided against that because the chocolate is falling and that wasn't really important to me. So for this I just I did it here, but it doesn't really matter. And when I put it into the points from volume, it sort of disappears and I move it up. And what I just decided to do here was to create two different chocolates, one at the bottom, one at the top, and they fall at different times. And so it gives me that leveled chocolate look that I was going for, because I wanted it to be a bit clumpy at the top. And in the LOPNET as well, there's nothing different. It's really just the flip objects falling onto the marshmallow. And that's pretty much it. For the meshing, I did a VDB from particles, VDB reshape as well, smoothed it out, and then I cached it. I also retimed it and then I cached it. So all this is going to be in the file that is going to be, I'm going to include the link in the description, and you can just find it there if you're curious. So I'm going to get into the render that I did and sort of talk about some of the settings that I used. Okay, so if we just go to an interesting frame, like frame like around here, that looks interesting. So what I did here, once I've brought in everything, if I go into my material library, I go into the Marshmellow, so you can see my setup is here. And what I did was I wanted to drive the base color using this my thickness attribute and a switch attribute. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to reduce these settings. So let's just maybe go back to default, just so it doesn't take forever to render. So in my Marshmellow, what I have is the thickness attribute which we created, and I ramped it based on color. If I do a quick render here, just give it a minute. Okay, so it's really chugging, but basically I just want to show what I've done here. And what I've done is to use the thickness attribute, ramp that with these colors. This is the burnt color, this is the normal color, and change the color of the Marshmellow based on the switch attribute. For the normal color, I've just done a unified noise and done like yellow to white for the ramp, and I place everything into the mix using the switch to mix it, and that goes into the base color. And for the specular roughness as well, I'm using the thickness and just ramping it white and gray, so it's pretty rough. And I don't think I added any displacement in the end. I think I decided not to do that because it was going to affect the color of the bumps, so I didn't want to do that. And that's majorly how I rendered this. I did use the new Copernicus, but I have another tutorial on that, and I'm not really going to dive into that today. But basically, this is the setup for this Marshmellow, how to transition using VDBs, and also how to render that using some of the attributes that we've made at sup level. This took me just a little time to render. I had about 4,000 and something for the Karma XPU path trace samples, and it was probably about 6 minutes per frame. My lighting is just basic lighting. I think the most interesting thing I've done here is to put a spotlight that's going to highlight the back, and I added some diffusers to make the light look a bit softer around the Marshmellow. So that's the end of the tutorial. I've included the project file in the description, and I would like to do some more food-centered tutorials. Let me know what you think in the comments.